I'm going to bring her into the women's luncheon to get her award. Let me bring up the next panel as we make this transition. Give a hand to the host of The Last Word, Lawrence O'Donnell on MSNBC. Come on, Lawrence. Shh. I told y'all we ain't jiving. One of the things that we do is fight in the courts and the street. And I don't know, fight in the legal process. And as we go into now police policy, that Lawrence O'Donnell's going to host for us. I think y'all are going to have to move out because you're getting ready to get no interview hollering over me. Yeah, take all that out. All right. I want to bring up, as the panel comes up to be seated,
You trying to be me? How are you, my sister? I'm great. Blessed and happy.
good. Hey, before I turn it over to Lawrence, you can be seated, everybody can be seated. I've been honored in my life to work with Johnny Cochran and others that fought in the court. There's one man that has represented to me the legal excellence and has been the heir in this generation to the work Johnny Cochran did. You know him as the attorney for the family of Michael Brown and Trayvon Martin. He's the new president of the National Bar Association, and I want to give him a few minutes to share with this conference our friend and brother, Attorney Benjamin Crump.
Y'all give it up for all our mentors, Reverend Al Sharpton. And what Reverend Al and I had a chance to talk about this morning, Leslie McSpadden, Michael Brown's mother, was the history that you all made, the National Action Network and the civil rights community who refused to stay silent when Michael Brown laid on the ground in Ferguson, Missouri for over 4 hours. And you all refused to go silently into the night. And that's why this morning we are proud to announce that history was made in Ferguson, Missouri when your community came out to vote and elected new city commissioners in Ferguson, Missouri. Now we have 3 African-American city commissioners in Ferguson. And that is the greatest legacy we can give to Michael Brown, Reverend Al. And you know, I would tell you, Nan, because it don't always get documented.
Come on.
Reverend Al Sharpton always answers the bell. You know, even before it's popular. When Michael Brown's grandfather called National Action Network, Reverend Al didn't think about, well, is it going to be controversial? Or what's the temperature of the community? He said, that child laying on the ground told his grandfather, I will be there. And it was amazing to me as I got to Ferguson, they already said, well, Reverend Al said, whatever we need, Attorney Crump, he's going to provide it. And so I came here to publicly say thank you to Reverend Al and the National Action Network for not just being there
That's right.
for the moment and the event, but staying with the issue of social justice, whether it's Trayvon Martin, whether it's Jordan Davis, and all these other stand your ground cases around America. There's another one, Reverend Al, in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Monroe Bird III. Y'all remember that. It's going to be big, Lawrence O'Donnell. He's on a ventilator, paralyzed from his neck down, shot by a security guard who's claiming stand your ground. I mean, it continues over and over. So we have to remember these issues. And I just thank God for Reverend Al, who's a leader who continues, even when we don't want to talk about it, when America starts saying, we just tired of hearing about this social justice and this race. Reverend Al said, you know, we can't be tired about it because those are our children that you keep killing. Am I right about it? We can't be tired about it, can we? We got to stand up, we got to speak up, and we got to fight for our children because they're our children. And if we don't stand up, nobody else is going to stand up. So God bless you. National Action Network, God bless you, Reverend Al. We made history. Ferguson will never be the same. And I can't wait to who the new police chief going to be.
All right. Give a hand, Attorney Ben Crump. Let me say, and we've already had a great convention from this morning, cutting the ribbon with 4 mayors and Congressman Rangel and others, and then our first panel, and on with El Yanya, our women's luncheon is going on, and now we're going to have our panel on police brutality, the impact, the victims speaking, and we have just concluded that. And now we go into our public policy part of it. Because unless you change the policy, you're not going to change the acts. We have on the panel Cynthia Davis, who's the president of National Action Network, Staten Island chapter. Where's Cynthia? Who has our office there and organized all the marches around the Eric Garner case. I was in Las Vegas, getting on the plane. She called me and told me, get on home. They choked the man, and his grandmother, his mother, wants to talk to you. And the rest was history. She has been on the front line for many years. Ronald Davis, Director of Office, Community-Oriented Policing Services, United States Department of Justice. Chief John Dixon, Chief of Police, Petersburg, Virginia. Major Neil Franklin, Executive Director, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. George Kelling of the Manhattan Institute. Glenn Martin, Just Leadership USA. Lucia McBath. We all know her and have marched with and stood with us. She's the national spokeswoman of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America after we all know what happened with her son. One of the best and most effective grassroots organizers in the country, Aisha Sakur, founder and CEO of Street Corner Resources. And the first Deputy Commissioner of New York City Police Department, and that is Commissioner Benjamin B. Tucker. And we're going to have them, then I want everybody luncheon as the women's lunch. Then we're going to have the Children of the Movements panel here, which is which will be Mrs. Elder Bernice King, daughter of Martin Luther King, daughter of Malcolm X, all the families of our fallen heroes on what it is that they had to grow up through. Then our next panel after that will be our generation panel. And then, of course, we're going to hear from Dr. Ben Carson. We heard from Senator Bernie Sanders this morning. So we're going both far left, far right. I know y'all going to wait to hear what Ben Carson got to say. No one I know has had sharper political insight, a more distinct and effective style, and has shown more courage to go and bring issues that others feared to do than the moderator of this panel. He's a man that does what he doesn't have to do. Given his background in politics and government, he does not have to raise the issues in order to get where he is in the public eye. He does it because he believes it. And I'm glad that I have become a colleague of his and been able to watch him up close. As a Baptist preacher, I say my prayers before I go to bed, and I watch The Last Word. The host of The Last Word on MSNBC, Lawrence O'Donnell.
Thank you, Rev. You know, my beginnings in public discussion were on this very subject. I wrote the first op-ed piece that the New York Times ever published on police use of deadly force, and that was in 1979. Don't do the math. I don't want you to figure out how old I am. But think about that. As of 1979, in our public affairs, there was no real public consideration of even the possibility of police abuse of deadly force, of the possible mistakes police can make with deadly force. The first time I spoke publicly on the subject was here in this city at a field hearing that Congressman Rangel brought to New York City on police practices and possible police misconduct that occurs out there in the streets, something that he knew was a problem. That was in the early 1980s. I published a book in 1984 about deadly force, police use of deadly force. So this is actually my first subject. Everything you see me talk about on TV at night, I know less about that than I do about this, okay? This is where it began for me. But what I'd like to do with the panel is if we could just go through one by one with a quick kind of headline comment of what you'd hope we can focus on in this discussion. The title of this discussion, I think, is very well phrased, perfectly phrased. Police policy, fighting crime without suspending rights. There are two hugely important objectives in that title. Fighting crime is a hugely important objective. That should not get lost. The importance of that objective and the value of that objective and the people that that objective serves should not get lost when we get into a discussion that is critical of police practices in the way that they fight crime. But let's just remember what that first mission is. Fighting crime, crucially important, equally important. Doing it without suspending rights. Doing it while preserving all the constitutional rights that citizens and police enjoy and expect to enjoy and expect their families to enjoy. So with that title in mind and with, I have to say, the news of the day in mind, the fact that we just last night saw this horrific video, which in the history of police practices you could say kind of bookends the Rodney King video, which is the spot where for many Americans who did not live in communities where people like Rodney King lived, that was the first time, the very first time, that most Americans realized that that kind of conduct was possible, and the only way they could ever know it is through the magic of videotape. Video has now entered the police sphere as never before. We have this horrific video from last night, which is, as you see it, it looks like just the worst kind of example of what many people have believed has happened in the past without the proof or evidentiary assistance of videotape. But we come here a day after that, and I don't think we can have this discussion without that incident in mind. But I'd like to begin with Commissioner Tucker and just go straight down this side of the panel, and then we'll get on this side of the panel, and really just a headline, just a bullet point of what you hope we can focus on today in the time we have.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here to join you. Appreciate the invitation, Reverend Sharpton, to join you for this conference, and hope we can have a constructive dialogue about what each of us is doing. I guess in terms of the question that Mr. O'Donnell raised, it's pretty simple in my book. I mean, the whole notion of fighting crime is critical. We all, I think, wherever we live, know we need to have protection, and that protection typically comes in the form of police, sheriffs, or local police departments. And, of course, the seminal job of police is to protect the public and also to uphold the Constitution of the United States. And so, for me, nothing's more important. As a kid who grew up in Brooklyn, as someone who understands what it's like to be stopped and frisked for no reason, and for someone who now is the first deputy police commissioner, second in command at the New York City Police Department, is pretty amazing. And so I hope that we have a discussion that focuses on how we accomplish that. And there are a number of ways, and I think as we go forward, we'll have an opportunity to sort of explore what those options are and why they're so important.
Professor Keller.
My name is George Kelling, and I'm perhaps best known for being the co-author of Broken Windows and Fixing Broken Windows. Thank you. I'd settle for one, but the fact that there were multiples gave me some hope. I guess what I would like to get understood here is what was originally meant by broken windows and how broken windows at times, the practice of the ideas have gone awry. I want to emphasize that as I make comments, although I've consulted with the New York City Police Department and other police departments, I speak for myself. I speak for George Kelling, and I don't speak for the New York City Police Department. I have worked in policing now and in communities for over 40 years. Lawrence is a youngster in comparison to me in that business, and I've spent time riding with police, walking with police, bicycling with police, and I've spent time in faith basements, in the residence of homes, in the residences. I spent time in public housing, talking with citizens, especially minorities. And what I've heard is there's been two major problems, one of which you've addressed in the first conference, and that is police brutality, and that it's been real, and it's a major problem, and much has been and much remains to be done, as we saw last night in South Carolina. But there's another side, and that's the one that I've focused on, and that is the underservice to minorities, especially the black community. Too often the attitude has been, well, that's the way they are, and that's the way it's left. And it seems to me that that's the complaint that I've struggled to address. Now, I understand that broken windows has become somewhat controversial. I hope that out of this, at least what I intended with broken windows and what broken windows in my mind really means becomes clear. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Lucia McBath, and I'm so very honored to be here this afternoon simply because of the personal nature of what I have experienced in my life, my family, my community, and the nation at large. And from a personal experience, being able to really come here today and open this dialogue and discussions about the nuances of, just the nuances of our individual rights, the laws, and how the gun violence in this country has disproportionately affected not only our communities of color, but the nation at large. So for me, it's very important to continue these kinds of discussions, solving the problems, finding solutions, and I'm very happy to be here and be able to do that with you today.
Peace and blessings, family. You know, my heart is heavy as I sit here. My name is Aisha Sekou, and I'm the founder and CEO of Street Corner Resources. The thing that makes my heart heavy is that Lucia McBath, when her son was murdered, my grandson called me from Jacksonville and said, when are you bringing Reverend Sharpton here? A guy that I play basketball with was murdered. I had no idea that we would be sitting side by side. So those of you that were in the room before we started, that's what you saw. It's very emotional, and I remember her saying, I'm not ready to do anything about this. And to see her activate now is just a very powerful thing that she's taking action. So I'm just overwhelmed right now. So when we talk about what we'd like to see happen, I have to talk about what I'd like to see not happen in terms of our community. And so I'll just quickly say, I was giving thought to this yesterday, and I was thinking about all of the shootings, and those of you that know me and my work, that we go out in the street when there's shootings, we respond to in terms of the hospitals and sit with young people either while they gain life or while they bleed out and die. And in that, it is a very sad time. At the same time, the camp is being set up in the community where the crime scene or the crime took place. And so now we have a tower where the playground was, right? And we have windows closed where people used to look out and the sun would come into their windows. Grandmothers had closed the windows and pulled down the shades and live in the dark in the housing developments that used to provide sunny light to their plants. I am so overwhelmed and concerned that our young people are becoming so accustomed to the kind of negative policing that we have had in our community as a result of crime in the community, that we get all of this stuff that happens that kind of criminalizes the entire neighborhood, so to speak, and everyone becomes suspect and stopped. So what I'd like to see happen, and this is not about a beat up with the police department. It's not about that. I've been working with the precincts in the areas where I work, the 32nd, the 28th, the 25th, the 36th, the 26th, the 25th, and the 30th and 34th precincts, and we've had numerous discussions over the last 10 years. But what I'd like to say is that we have to really get to a place beyond these talks, and Mr. Tucker and I know we've had these discussions since he's been deputy to the commissioner, that we have to really have real change happen. We cannot continue to let our young people be criminalized in our communities to be locked down, locked up, grandmothers can't come out because either they're afraid of the police or police actions or overly aggressive policing, or they're afraid of the very young people in their community that have not been provided services that continue to remain in the community, or they return from incarceration with no services. So we have a number of things that we have to do. We have to have real conversation that lends to real action in our community. Enough of the forums, enough of the lie-downs and all of these other things. We have to take real action. We need real change, and we can't criminalize an entire community because we can't get this together. Our children are watching. Our children are watching, and we must make change.
Good afternoon. I apologize for being late, first of all. When I came in, I was told that the event was happening across the hall. And I went across the hall and the room was empty, and I said, there's no way we're having a conversation about policing at this conference, and the room is empty. So I figured it out within a few minutes, so here I am. I apologize. Thank you to Reverend Sharpton and to National Action Network for the opportunity to be here today and to have this very important discussion. And I imagine that during this discussion, we'll talk about things like police accountability, police legitimacy, community-based policing, broken windows, and so on. I think those are important policy discussions to have. But as a person who grew up in New York City, Brooklyn, Bronx, Harlem, and someone who also had a father who was a police officer and now has a brother who's a U.S. Marshal and a younger brother who served 2 years in prison, and then myself having served 6 years in prison. Number one, I appreciate the fact that Reverend Al Sharpton always creates a space for people directly impacted to have a voice, and that's part of why I'm pleased to be on this panel today. and that he values those voices as part of the discussion. But you know what I learned when I was in prison? That we lock up some of America's best and brightest.
Come on now.
And so my saddest day in prison was the day I walked out of prison, because I knew I was leaving behind some of America's best and brightest, and most of them young, black, and brown men of color, and increasingly young black and brown women of color. And so if you believe in social justice, then prisons are the belly of the beast. And law enforcement is the feeder for that beast. And that's why today's discussion is so important. And I've gone from sitting in that prison cell to advising policy advisors to the United States Attorney General. And one thing I've learned is that people who are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And that I hope we have a discussion today that includes paying more attention to the very people who are the victims of the racial profiling that we're discussing on today's panel. Because I believe that the people who've experienced those behaviors, the people who have had their identity shaped by police departments all over this country, have something to contribute to the conversation. I run an organization that invests heavily in people who've served time in prison, a year-long leadership training, so that they can be part of this discussion to help us find a solution. I remember being in City Hall about 2.5 years ago. It was about 5 of us, and it was our then Mayor Bloomberg. And we got into a discussion about our president, and I won't get into the details of that discussion, but then we got into a discussion about stop and frisk. And at one point he sort of says, Glenn, come on, I know how you feel about stop and frisk, but it's blacks and Latinos committing all the crime. Where do you want me to send my cops? And you know what I'll tell you? That cops have nothing to do with safety. If I tell everyone in this room to close your eyes and think of the safest day you ever had in your life, and think about what it smelled like and what it looked like and who was there and what you were eating and what you were doing, I guarantee you just about no one in this room would say they saw a police cruiser in that vision, or a shotgun, or a pair of handcuffs. Because there are many communities across this country that are safe, and it has nothing to do with police officers patrolling those communities. So I hope we have that sort of discussion today on this panel. Thank you.
Major Franklin.
My name is Neil Franklin. I'm a retired major from the Maryland State Police and former colonel with the Baltimore Police Department. I'm currently the executive director for law enforcement against prohibition. I've got over 3 decades in law enforcement in the state of Maryland, and most of that was in drug enforcement and criminal investigation and also training for police. There's been a lot of work done recently, unfortunately, but needed work as relates to our policies around this country. President Obama's task force, which was chaired by Chief Ramsey and Professor Laurie Robinson, and they've come away from that project with a whole laundry list of recommendations for police departments, and community, and how to better these relationships and how to improve on some of the things that we are experiencing. And this is all well and good, needed things, stuff that we need to do, that we should be doing, that we should always be working on. But what I hope to do, or what I hope we talk about today, which I think is at many times omitted, this is a long-term piece of work that I'm talking about. The laws that we currently place in front of our police officers and task them with enforcing. Yes, we talk about policies all the time, but do we really talk about the laws that they are tasked with enforcing? Drug prohibition, the war on drugs. It's not a war on drugs. It's a war on people, and I think most of you know that. I hope that everyone in this room has read Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow. And if you have not read it, you need to. You need to. Some of what you may hear from me during this panel discussion, you may think that I'm anti-police, but obviously I'm not. 3 decades in this business. I love this profession, and I want to better this profession. What I am anti about, I'm anti-abusive police,
I am anti-abusive systems and policies that support that behavior. And the lack of accountability that we have. And I am anti-laws that we place in front of our police officers requiring them to enforce laws that are not enforceable, laws that end up being the foundation for racial profiling in this country. And we have to keep an eye on laws that are coming down the road. That's what I am anti about. And we have to get beyond this notion, and I understand why we think, and the abuse of drugs have devastated our communities, our black communities. I get that. But the war on drugs has obliterated the black family, neighborhoods, and our communities far more than drug abuse ever could. And we've got to come together to address that and change these laws. Thank you.
So, good afternoon. My name is Ron Davis. I'm currently the director of the United States Department of Justice COPS Office, which stands for Community-Oriented Policing Services. And I'll come back to that because I think that phrase, community policing, is one of the key phrases of where we need to go. I also had the honor of being appointed by the President to serve as the Executive Director of the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. So, before I went to the Justice Department about a year and a half ago, I spent 30 years in law enforcement, like my brother to the left. I spent 8 years of that as a police chief. I spent 20 years in Oakland, 21 years in Oakland, and 8.5 years in the city of East Palo Alto. Both great cities, very diverse, with significant challenges of crime and violence that many of our urban centers are dealing with. So when I look at this title, this is a very appropriate title talking about issues of crime and rights. But I hope, Lawrence, what comes out of this is the false choice that we keep giving you, that you have to pick between safe streets or civil liberties. And that is not a choice that you should pick. So what I hope comes out of here, we have a defining moment in American history to redefine policing and public safety in this country. Public safety cannot just be the absence of crime. It must include the presence of justice. You cannot have safe streets while you're violating people's rights. The best way to become safe is to kind of have relationships that will make people safe. I think the person who said, when you close your eyes, you don't see the police. Well, I think the police contribute, but not by the enforcement. It is by working with the community. And so if we're going to really focus on public safety and reducing crime, the only way to do that is to use constitutional rights as the foundation for that. If you think about it, we cannot keep trying to justify these rights, violation of rights, by saying that we reduce crimes. Telling somebody that homicides are down 30% does not forgive the fact that you stopped fleeing people inappropriately to get there. Telling somebody that your overall crime rate is down 15% cannot forget that we are at mass rates and disparate rates incarcerating an entire generation of young men of color. That means they lose their ability for economic development and growth, education, and most importantly, in many cases, the ability to vote. So this is an opportunity we have. The President of the United States, the Attorney General, whether smart on crime, my brother's keeper, or the task force, is committed to making sure that public safety is not just about reducing statistical crime. It's about ensuring that everyone in this room that looks like us has justice. Now, after being a cop for 30 years, I am proud of my profession, but it's kind of funny. The next week and a half, I'll meet my son in Boston. He's now a senior in high school, getting ready to go to college. And I love my son with my heart. I have 3 kids, 2 daughters and 1 son. And when I watch him right now, and he just started driving, which is nervous, is a problem all by itself. But you and I know this. Even after being a cop for 30 years, being a police chief, I still had to teach him a class. And that was what to do with Stop by the Police, which is a mandatory class in this country for young men of color. I'll say that. People will get upset because I say it, but I say it as a cop. I say it as a person who has lived with the badge for 30 years, that is proud of being a cop, that I think most of them are doing a tremendous job, but it is still nonetheless a class that I must teach. We have to go from going to that to where I can send my son off to college and not worry about anything other than him studying, not basically bringing me grandkids before my time, and basically graduating. So I look forward to the discussion.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the obvious choice here. One of the things, One, I want to thank Reverend Al Sharpton and Nan for allowing me to be here because I think it's so important and so relevant that I am here because, one, I wear several different hats like you've heard from the other counterparts. One, I'm a black male, and I'm a black male in America, and all of these things concern me as a black male in America. Two, I have two black male sons that I have to raise as well, and that concerns me how they deal with the general public, how they deal with police officers out there. And three, I'm a police chief. I've been in this profession over 30 years, and I've seen some ups and downs. I've seen some goods and bad. I've seen when people love the police. I've seen when people didn't love the police. So, I'm wearing all those different hats. I'm also the immediate past president of NOBLE, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, and we always are at the forefront of dealing with a lot of these kind of issues because it's important to us. It's important to us that we have constitutionally policing. And I want to be clear on that. That means, kind of what the director just said to my left, that, we have a society where policing, and safeness coincide with each other, not one or the other. Because, it's important that we're safe. It's important that we treat the public right. It's important that we get along. And what I want to get out of this, one of the things that, that I heard that down the table, I'm tired of meeting. I'm tired of talking about it. Give you what my kids say, let's be about it. Let's figure out how to walk away here with some solutions. We got to get along. I mean, it's no separating. You can't get rid of the police. Police can't get rid of the community. It's going to coexist. Well, we have to figure out how to coexist, how to get along, how to fix these issues and go forward, to the next problem, because there's going to be another one out there. But we need to fix this one. One of the things that I'm so glad I heard that the attorney Crump spoke, that people went out and voted. My grandma always said, if you can't change those around you, then you change those around you. And some of y'all get that when you go home. You can ask my pastor. But it's so important to understand that, we as black people need to get out there and make a difference and put the right people in office that represent our needs and those things that we want and hold them accountable. Hold them accountable. Hold them to being a transparent organization. Hold them accountable for making sure that they put these laws in place and these things in place that are not bias-based. Because, exactly, we got a war on drugs. Okay, that means lock up a bunch of young black people. I mean, you look at the statistics. Look at what was done. The war on drugs, did that for something that that right now in certain states that become illegal. But we had a war on something that's becoming illegal. Okay, go get it. Anyway, I know we need enough time because I could go on forever here. I'm going to go ahead and pass the baton on and look forward to some very healthy discussion. Thank you.
Good afternoon, family. My name is Najee Ali. I'm the LA Political Director of the National Action Network in Los Angeles under the leadership of our president, K.W. Toulis. And I'm grateful to be on this panel with such distinguished panelists. And I'm honored that Reverend Sharpton allowed me this platform. As an activist from South Central LA, I've been active in the community for the last 25 years. I began after the beating of Rodney King, which Mr. O'Donnell referenced when he spoke about how that videotaped highlighted what most Americans saw is that we do have a problem with police brutality. But with all due respect, Mr. O'Donnell, that's what white Americans finally realized there was a problem with police abuse. Black Americans, we've always known there's been a problem with police abuse, police brutality, racial profiling, the murder of unarmed black men and women by law enforcement nationwide. So what I hope to get out of today is a way that we can try to reframe and actually get rid of what I feel is a broken policy of the broken window policy. Because for me, that's what got Eric Gardner killed, was that type of policing. That's what got him murdered over a pack of cigarettes. When we talk about the incident that happened last night, that brother had a name. His name was Walter Scott, who was shot in the back by the police 8 times. The officer tried to lie about it. Luckily, we had videotape. But when you think about it, the man was stopped for a traffic violation. It was broad daylight when he was stopped. When you watch the videotape, it's broad daylight. So for me, I want to see how we can try to, end what I feel is a failed policy of broken window policing through our communities, because what it does is actually racially profiles black and brown. It also increases our contact with the police disproportionately. So I think we have to have an honest discussion on whether this policy works or whether it doesn't work. In my opinion, it's been a failure and increased the deaths of black people at the hands of law enforcement nationwide. Thank you.
Hello, sisters and brothers. My name is Cynthia Davis. I am the president of the Staten Island chapter of the National Action Network. I'm also an activist for over 25 years fighting police brutality and other cases. And I agree with Brother Ali. That's something that I wanted to say. The broken window theory. It is my belief that the only place that the broken window theory belongs is on a house. I have another theory. How about you cannot judge a book by the cover theory? Because with the broken window theory, you categorize everyone in the community the same if you're in that area. And again, I think that's what got Eric Garner murdered by the police. I know that's a big word. I think that the officers that were there, they knew who he was. They had numerous times he had been arrested, but nevertheless, they found it necessary to tackle a man that they knew was nonviolent. And I think this all comes from the broken window theory. So what I would like to see come out of this, I would like to see, I think that back in the day we had something that was called community policing, where the police knew the community and the community people and members knew who the police officers were. And I think that the police officer could walk up to you and say, you better get it together, if not, I'm going to go and tell your mother. And the mother could come up to the police officer and ask, what is my son out here doing? Is he all right? Your son is fine. So I think we need to bring back community policing, and that's what I would like to see come out of this today.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Minister Kirsten John Foy. I'm the Northeast Regional Director for the National Action Network. I'm the Brooklyn Conference Chair, and I have been working with the National Action Network, alongside the National Action Network, for almost 20 years, which is about half of my lifetime. And in that time, I have worked with victims of police brutality. I've worked with victims of police aggression, police murder. And in all of that time, it wasn't until very recently, as a matter of fact, with Eric Garner, that I realized that we have been focused on the wrong things. I have a problem with the concept of constitutional policing. And the problem is that the Constitution is flawed. The reality is that we have a phenomenon of mass incarceration, which is based on a loophole in the 13th Amendment, which allows for the enslavement of people who have been convicted of crime. So if we want to deal with the real cause of the criminal justice system failing to meet its mandate for equal protection for all of its citizens, we have to go back to the Constitution. We have to fix the 13th Amendment, and we have to remove the economic imperative that there is to incarcerate us, thereby removing the imperative for the police department to act overly aggressively towards us. We have been focused on things like marijuana policy, which is good to focus on. We've been focused on things like broken windows, which, by the way, I think if the window is broken, you fix it. You don't criminalize the people that live in the building. But those are just superficial policies. the real core of the problem is the economic imperative that is born out of the 13th Amendment allowing for the enslavement of people anyway. It is 2015. If we cannot devise or construct a criminal justice system that does not allow for enslavement, then we need to get off of our high horse and stop pretending that we are the light of the world. Because the reality is that we still have a system that divides people based on whether or not you are entitled to freedom or whether or not you are not entitled to freedom. If you are convicted of a crime, you are not entitled to freedom. Oh, and even after you've served your time, you're not entitled to vote, so you're not entitled to freedom. So we've got to get back to the core of the issue. The core of the issue is whether or not we all are entitled to equal protection under the law. And if we are all entitled to equal protection under the law and we are not receiving it, then that means that there's something wrong with the core of the law. And so we've got to eliminate that. I believe we have got to amend the 13th Amendment. We have got to remove the economic imperative for mass incarceration, and that is born out of the 13th Amendment. Don't allow people to disguise the issues, to divert the attention. The reality is there is an entire population of people, millions and the millions, who live behind bars in this country. The majority of them are there because of economic conditions that prevented them from realizing their true potential. Whether it was dilapidated, overutilized schools, or whether it was the lack of affordable housing, or the lack of job opportunities and employment opportunities. These are economic issues. If we continue to focus on things like, and they're good, I want to commend the mayor for revising and reforming marijuana policy. That's a good step. I want to commend him for holding the NYPD accountable to the Constitution by saying you cannot just indiscriminately stop black and Latino men because they are black and Latino. Those are tremendous steps forward. However, they will not address the core of the problem. And until we address the core of the problem, which is the flaw in the Constitution and the economic imperative, we are all here subjected to having our freedoms removed and having our futures determined by others who see us as a commodity and wish to profit off of us. And he's not officially on the panel, but Councilmember Jumaane Williams. Many of you may have recognized us from getting stomped out on Eastern Parkway for Labor Day. He was the other guy that got stomped out with me. And he is the one responsible for the passage of the Community Safety Act, which established the first independent Office of Inspector General for the NYPD, and made it illegal to engage in racial profiling.
What's up, everybody? I'm a late add-on, but thank you very much. I'm honored to be on this panel. I didn't hear the question, but I heard some of the responses, so I'll just be very brief. First, my thing is, I think the trouble sometimes that we have is, first of all, pushing back against a construct that is working how it was designed to work from the beginning. So I always get surprised when people are shocked that the people who look like those who were enslaved are at the bottom, and the people who are succeeding the most are those who did the enslaving and are on top. So that is the way the country was set up and designed to operate. So if the Founding Fathers woke up, they might say, pretty good job you're doing. I don't know why there's a black president or why women are voting. So that might be the question that they asked. So it was designed that way, and it's working. But I am proud, because I was born in this country, that there has always been people pushing back against that construct, and this is part of that discussion. And so for me, there are two things that I hope come out of the discussion, which I think was the question. One is just police departments across the board to acknowledge that we police black communities differently, period. We have to start with that sentence, because we try to beat around it, but that is the core of what the problem is, whether it is the prison industrial complex, whether it's policing or whatever it is. You pick any statistic, and it's tough to be black in this country in 2015, period. So we have to say that so that we can correct the problems. But if we don't acknowledge the problems, it's going to be very, very difficult to correct it. So we just have to say, look, we've been policing you based on race differently, and now we have to correct that and try to get to these discussions on how to correct that. Because what I worry about is we dealt with stop, question, and frisk. Now we're dealing with broken windows. I'm afraid, I'm hoping they're not co-opting community policing. But on that trajectory, if we don't deal with the race problem, you can put the best police policy in place, it will fall back into the historic patterns that have come before it. And then second is to make sure that the conversation, while I understand we have to focus on police reform, but public safety is not just law enforcement. And so they always say that we put more police officers in these communities because they ask for them. But these same communities, they do. But these same communities ask for better housing conditions. They ask for better paying jobs. They ask for their streets to be clean. They ask for better education. For some reason, we don't hear those asks, and we hear one ask. And so I'm hoping that we can pull in other agencies who are just as bad on the race issue as the police department. And we get snapped up quick, because obviously the police have the force of law and can kill people. But these policies, when it comes to housing, education, and jobs, are killing communities just as bad. It's just happening slowly. And then we send the police in to make sure that they're contained and happy being with how they are being treated. So my hope is that as we talk about public safety and police reform, we hold everybody to the same accountability. Because I believe if we fixed the housing issues, the job issues, the education issues, we would need law enforcement less and less in those communities.
Professor Kelling, we heard some strong criticisms of the broken windows theory. I want you to compose your thoughts. I call this a tease in television, because I want to ask Ron Davis something first, but we're going to come to the broken windows theory immediately after that. And Ron, one of your jobs these days, I believe probably would not exist if Barack Obama were not president of the United States. A president's task force on policing. This president, in my knowledge of this history over decades, has brought more direct presidential attention, time, and comments to these issues than any president in history. And I'd like you to talk about what you think the effect of presidential attention and in fact his own life experience with these issues before he even got into politics, what that means in the work you're doing in the task force.
So thank you for the question, and I think you're right. Presidential leadership means everything. The last actual review or commission of this nature in policing or public safety was like 1967. Now, it brought about some significant changes then, but a lot has changed since 1967. So the president was very clear. He said he wanted two things addressed. One, how do we start with concrete recommendations? I think some people on the panel said this. He didn't want a two-year process. He didn't want a fancy report sitting on a shelf. How do we have concrete recommendations that we can start implementing immediately that to build trust and at the same time ensure that we continue this downward trajectory with crime reduction that we've been achieving over the last 20 or 30 years. The president was asked a specific question when he announced it. Why is this report different? Why would this be different than any other task force report? And there's task forces for everything. And he said because the president of the United States is for it's personal for him and it's a priority. So one is he then ordered us to get this done in 90 days. So we had 7 listening sessions. We listened to hundreds of witnesses. We listened to many people in this room testify, give us ideas, and we now have some concrete recommendations that quite frankly are actionable. What you'll hear in the near future is the president announce how he will then use the leadership even further to support it. So there's a lot of things that, policing for the most part is local. We recognize that, we know that. But there is a role that the federal government can play. My agency, for example, right now is managing close to about $1.5 billion in grants. How do we use those grants to advance community policing? How do we basically lift up the agencies that are doing it effectively so that we can share it with the 18,000 agencies? How do we take the goals of this president, whether it's the task force, my brother's keeper, to make sure that every law enforcement officer, close to 1 million of them, understand what communities are looking for? I think the president also made it clear, Lawrence, that he respects law enforcement immensely, like everyone in this room. We really appreciate and embrace the men and women who put their lives on the line and do a good job. But there is no room for the kind of misconduct that too often we are seeing. There is no room for the systemic failure that is resulting in disparate treatments to what I think some of our panelists talked about. And so I think, and I'm obviously very biased with this, that for the President of the United States to make this a priority, to put his own stamp on it, to have the Attorney General of the United States go around the country, talk about smart on crime, and tackle issues for which many people will attack him for, but had the courage to take on, says that this administration has made public safety a priority. But public safety, once again, in a sense that is not just about reducing crime, it's about justice, fairness, and equality as well. And so I think we should get behind this administration as the president takes these courageous steps. And I would strongly recommend you look at the report, that you read it. It's in a format that what you can do with it is work with your department and ask them, out of the 63 recommendations, how many are you engaged in? And if you're not, why not? And how do we together make sure we do that? Whether it is how to build trust, whether it's legitimacy, whether it's how we investigate officer-involved shootings, whether it is fairness, whether it is how we deal with mental people suffering from mental illness. There's a lot in that report to embrace, and I would suggest that I would really recommend people do that. But I think to your question, the idea that you have presidential leadership, that the President of the United States, I happen to be, I would share this with you in the closing, and while we were putting the report together, the President still had a lot of questions, and he still was very much, really wants to know about the community policing, so he convened 6 officers from around the country, police officers, and wanted to talk to them to find out, what do you define as community policing? How does it look to you? And some of the stories heard really make us very optimistic, because you had officers talking about reading to kids, what about making sure kids are at reading level before 3rd grade, making sure we reduce incarceration rates, that we become a part of the community. So we know that it's within us to do it. We know we have the presidential and the Attorney General leadership, and we know we have communities all across this country now walking and marching and demanding something different. This is a new civil rights movement. And I'm 51 years old, so I was very young during the first one. But I would ask my law enforcement colleagues, this one could be different, because instead of being against the police, it should be with the police and changing the systems that we know are having the disparate outcomes for our communities. So I think presidential leadership will take the lead on that one.
Professor Kelling, I'd like to get your response to the criticisms we've just heard about the broken window theory that you co-authored with Professor James Q. Wilson.
Thank you. I meant to thank Nan for inviting me in the first place. I understood from the beginning that it would probably be quite controversial, and I was not disappointed. This is serious, grave business. We're talking about life and death matters. We're talking about community. We're talking about basic levels of order in communities, and this gets to the gut of our life. And so it's essential that we deal with these things. And the first thing I'd like to say is, I wish people who criticize broken windows would understand that, first of all, Broken Windows was written in 1982. That was a speculative article by James Q. Wilson and me. And basically the argument was that minor things matter. They're terribly important in communities, and I'll come back to that. The second thing that was written about this by me was called Fixing Broken Windows. And in it, we described policies in terms of trying to deal with the problems of disorder in cities and communities. And we were concerned about fixing broken windows. And for me, as I've presented and worked in police departments, I've never been an advocate of high levels of arrest. I think an arrest is a failure, and the job of police is to protect. But also, in terms of fixing broken windows, we were concerned that other people do their jobs as well. And I liked what Jumane said in terms of holding other agencies accountable as well. The mental health community, for example, that lets these people suffer in subway stations and is not active getting those people help, the housing and the things that they need. The police can call attention to that, and they can ask for help. And now police in New York City, the homeless outreach unit is patrolling with 84 social workers so that the social workers can deal directly with those people who are suffering from emotional illness and who are suffering from alcohol and drug abuse. That, in my mind, is an example of broken windows, which in my vernacular is part of quality policing. And let me make another point. And that is, I said earlier that I've been in this business a long time. I wish I could see you. These lights are so bright that I can't see you. I wish I could see your faces so I could feel I was talking more directly. But I said I was in church basements, and I was in living rooms, and I've been in the toughest areas that we've had in the United States. I've sat in the Robert Taylor homes in Chicago. I don't know how many of you have seen the Robert Taylor homes. They've been torn down since, but I sat with mothers and children and families there. And if you ask them what are the problems that they're confronted with, and you ask them to list 5, at least 3 of these are going to be minor issues, and probably 4 are, about which they want something done. And at times the police can do things, but at other times the police need help from other people. The idea that broken windows emphasizes arrest is simply not as I've advocated. Broken windows for me is a way of fixing communities by doing the things, the proper things, police helping citizens. You know, we live in a democracy. In a democracy, we believe that citizens govern themselves. If it follows from that, and this is the heart of community policing, if citizens can govern themselves, they can police themselves, and they ought to be policing themselves with police as their backups and their surrogates if they're needed. But policing is a total community responsibility. It is part of governing. Now, have there been broken windows programs that have been called broken windows programs that have nothing to do with what I've written, that have nothing to do with my consultation in police departments, whether in Milwaukee or Detroit or New York City here? And so let me just suggest to some of you, if you really want to know what my philosophy was, what broken windows was intended to be, then read Fixing Broken Windows as well as Broken Windows, because I believe in fixing broken windows because residents want this. They're suffering because of the disorder in their communities, and order is an end in itself. If there's not order, economics can't thrive, churches can't thrive, houses of worship can't thrive. You need basic levels of order, and you need basic levels of crime control. I learned my lessons sitting in living rooms and church basements, talking to citizens, many of them African American or Hispanic, many poor whites as well, and they wanted order. They didn't want somebody peeing on their front steps. They wanted that taken care of. And, you know, it seems to me that we have examples of if only the lights had been fixed, which wasn't a police responsibility, we might not have had a death. So fixing broken windows is important, but it's more than just a police responsibility. It's a community and other agency responsibility. And I think we truly should hold the police accountable for fixing broken windows and not just arresting people, but we should be holding the other agencies equally responsible. And I think Jumane there is right on the mark. I'd be perfectly willing to go on. I'm an ex-seminarian, and I have been known to preach at times, but this stuff really matters, and it matters as to whether we're going to keep communities intact and what citizens want. And if you go out and sit and listen and talk to citizens in their churches, in their homes, in their places of worship, one gets a feeling that there's a demand for order that was long ignored, and that was the first point I made, and That's how these people are. Let them live that way. We'll whip in, we'll whip out. We won't stay in there for any length of time. We'll go in as short as we can and get out of there as soon as we can. That's not quality policing. That's not what I ever had in mind. Thank you for the time to talk with you.
I have an organizational announcement. Reverend Sharpton needs all chapter leaders to come to Empire West now. And you know what I think? I think he means now, okay? So, Commissioner Tucker, to Professor Kelling's reference there to nuisance activity, like peeing on someone's front step, yeah, we all agree we want that to stop. And I think the question that gets raised by broken windows theory is what kind of police action should be brought to a nuisance like that? What kind of guns need to be brought to that? How many officers need to be brought to that? What is the correct reaction to a minor incident like that?
So, I mean, it's an interesting question. Police officers they're armed. I mean, this is part of the job. And so they will respond. They're on patrol, they're on foot, and they'll respond as calls come in. As it relates to the question of what type of calls they respond to, it all depends on who's calling and what they're calling about. And so I think that the real question is, what do they do when they arrive, and how do they handle the situation when they arrive? I mean, that's really what it's about. And for me, the answer to that question should always be when they arrive, they take the action, they observe, they see what the call is about, and they use their training and their skill as a police officer to address it. And from my perspective, the key is to begin when they respond to those calls for service in a way that sort of is based on the foundation of using, being respectful, assessing, and using conversation as opposed to physical force, and so forth. So that's the goal, and that's the way we're spending our time these days, training our officers to remind them of their role. So it's not so much it's not an easy question to answer, except in as much as it starts out with officers doing the proper assessment when they arrive on the scene, getting the information, and then taking the action that they believe is necessary. That action could be a warning. It could be a conversation with the individuals. Maybe it's a group of kids. I mean, when I was a young cop on the streets, you responded to a number of calls, and very often the call you get is coming from people in the community who are disturbed by the nuisance. It wasn't always about dogs or individuals being on people's lawns or against walls, but it was certainly something that the citizens in that community, whether it was public housing, whether it was elsewhere in the communities, it was something that the citizens there thought needed to be addressed, and that's why they call the police. And that's no different today. I mean, if you look at not so much our 911 calls, but also people who call 311, they call because there's something that's taken place that they find not to be criminal in nature very much, but rather a nuisance, something that would be a violation. And the individual officers have broad discretion in how they handle that. And I think what we try to do, and what I've spent my time doing since I returned to the department last year as the Deputy Commissioner for Training, is to really have our officers focus on and provide them with training that reminds them what the options are. But we've heard the words quality and we've heard the words quantity. Quantity tends to get us in trouble. It can't be about the numbers. And I can tell you that the focus that we have right now, and Commissioner Bratton and the rest of the executive staff of the department, is very much about quality policing. And I can go on and just to give you a sense of what the training has been about, and how focused we are on ensuring that our officers get that message, and not just the officers who are new recruits and in the police academy. That's always critical. And for me, if we train them properly from the beginning, the quality of policing will increase. as they hit the streets and receive their field training and then go forth to serve. But also, more importantly, the job is to focus on those officers who have been in service for some length of time and who need to be retrained in some respects. And so we are providing training that reminds them of the role that we expect them to play. So that it's in terms of, I don't know if that gives you a sense of how I've responded to the question and whether or not that's sufficient, but I think you get a sense both that the answer is not necessarily one that isn't complex, but also that we've given it a lot of thought. It's something I've spent a lot of time thinking about with our folks who provide the training for our officers, and it's the kind of message that we've been sending at every level of the department, from the beat cops straight up to our executive staff for the past little more than a year.
I know you people have a lot better questions than I do. I'm just going to ask one more, and then we're going to open it up to audience questions. Major Franklin, George Kelling's, I think, least known work is fixing broken windows. Everyone wants to talk about broken windows. I never hear people talking about the work he's done criticizing implementation of broken windows theory around the country. In your experience, what do you think of the big misinterpretations from an academic paper like Broken Windows in 1982 to how that applies to policing today?
Well, let me begin with first, I actually worked under that broken windows theory and commanded officers who implemented it. And the way that we understood it, first of all, is that it wasn't zero tolerance. And there's a distinct difference between zero tolerance, which you saw with Eric Garner, than the broken windows theory. The broken windows theory was about all these departments and city services and community services that would come together to fix things that need to be fixed and repaired within a community. But the police officer was the one reporting, kind of like they're there every day, reporting and advising what needs to be fixed. There's street lights out. How about getting somebody out here to fix these street lights? Trash needs to be picked up, because we would hope that it coming from the police department that, it would get done. There's an abandoned car here, get somebody here to move it, and there's a rat problem. Working that way to help, in a sense, repair the broken window. It wasn't about zero tolerance. It wasn't about the numbers of arresting people for these minor infractions. Someone sitting on the stoop. And let's be real here. If communities are working, if neighborhoods are working, if families are healthy, hopefully that's dealt with before you have to call the police appropriately. I know it did in my neighborhood when I was growing up. But if the police are called, it begins with a relationship. If the police don't have a relationship with the people, especially the young people in those communities, you're going to have problems. And if you have that relationship, and you don't have the things that interfere with that relationship, and I'm sorry, but I got to keep bringing it back to these policies and laws that we have that cause us, the police, to come in and search people and strip search them in the middle of the street and do these things that we do looking for drugs and this, that, and the other, going after the numbers. I'm going to keep bringing it back to that. If we don't have that, then we can build some relationships. In Colorado right now, where they have changed their marijuana laws, over the past 3 years, 37,000 less arrests. You hear what I said? 37,000. Now don't get me wrong, that's not a panacea, but it's a damn good beginning to rebuilding some bridges between police and community when you don't have that nonsense going on. So, this academic paper of fixing broken windows, I also agree. Read it and understand what it was truly about. Somehow, in many communities, it morphed over into this zero tolerance thing. And it's not one and the same. It's not one and the same. Zero tolerance should never be and should go if it's happening in your communities.
Questions?
My question is for any of the police officers on the panel. Every job that I've ever had, they would give me a rule book. And we very quickly learned which rules we could break and which rules would mean we would never get promoted or would immediately get fired. My question for the police officers on the panel is, am I wrong in thinking that if there were ramifications for cops violating the people who they were supposed to be serving, if they were transferred or demoted, forget about whether they get put in jail because that's not in any of your purview, but if the supervisors were to transfer or demote or fire those cops, wouldn't most of this stop right then and there, or am I wrong in thinking?
Chief Dixon, you want to take that?
I knew I was here for a reason. First and foremost, those rules are already in place. The issue goes deeper than those rules. You know, the issue goes to culture of the organization. It goes to accountability of those folks in charge. It goes to transparency so that there is no hidden blue line there. So it goes a lot deeper. Of course, there's rules that if you abuse, if you do all those things, you know, and all those things exist. And I don't dismiss all the way up into putting an officer in jail for violating the law. You know, so don't even dismiss that piece because that is in the purview of depending on who the leadership in that organization is and how they take it. You know, breaking those rules, you know, those violations exist, but you got to hold your leadership accountable. You got to say, you know what, this thing happened, and I don't care what profession you're in, you're going to have bad whoever. You got bad doctors, lawyers, Indian chiefs, whatever exists out there. But to hold those folks accountable for what they do is where the key here is. You know, because there ain't but so many times that you're going to say, okay, you know, Officer Joe, you broke this rule, and they keep hitting me on it. At some point in time, I'm going to fix what needs to be taking place. So that's where we need to look at. Hold those folks accountable because we don't need another rule, just like we don't need another law. We got things that exist out there. What we need to put in place is accountability for those things that are already in place and make sure that those folks, you know, are held accountable.
If I could add to that, this is going back to my chief days. Even beyond that, people, cops included, do what brings them value. And so what message you send to the chief matters. If you basically embrace the idea that making a lot of arrests are important to you, therefore awards are given because of the amount of arrests you made, that you would basically give a higher acknowledgement for a seizure of cocaine than you would from someone working with the community solving a problem, then cops will gravitate to that which brings them value. So even before you get to the discipline, what are your priorities as the leader of the organization? What do you value? What do you put inside your reading materials when you want to do a promotion? If you want people to read something, put it on a promotional test, and then you'll see what people will gravitate to. So there's many ways to really change the culture of an organization. The first with leadership is you set the values of the organization. You bring to the organization what matters. You then make it very clear that you measure. You cannot manage what you don't measure. And what measure does matter. And so you're telling the officer every time you collect something, if you're collecting stop data, you're sending a very clear message, what matters to you. If you're looking at disparities and you're questioning arrest and you're finding options other than arrest, it's very clear what matters. If you're giving citations and awards because of problems that are being solved and people are working with the community, that matters. If you're disciplining people because they violate those core values, not just some simple rule, but the core value of respecting dignity in people, that matters. So the leadership matters a lot, and it's not just simply policy. Because you're dead on, and you're hitting it 100%, is as a chief, whatever I wanted, for the most part, the officers will provide for me. And my chain of command can be I used to say as a police chief, and most chiefs here will say this, the watch commander or the podium is one of the most dangerous pieces of equipment that I've had in my department. Because at that podium, when some sergeant lieutenant is talking to my troopers, they can raise an eyebrow, they can make a hint, they can say something that will give a very clear message to the rank and file whether or not that was important or that was the old man talking a bunch of nonsense that we have no intent of enforcing. So you have to speak it, you have to enforce it with your chain of command, and you have to hold everyone in the department accountable for it, both in awards and discipline, and you got to make it very clear. I used to have a thing called deadly sins, and that meant, I told you right up from the front, the 5 deadly sins, and if you violate it, you knew you were going to get recommended for termination without hesitation. Commissioner Tucker?
Yeah, just so to Ron's point and to the chief's point, just to add my 2 cents. NYPD, we have 50,000 people, 35,000 officers, and so you have to have a system in place where the rules are very clear. So we have all of those documents, and we follow them to a T. But the key is, and I'll just echo what's been said already in many ways, but I don't think it's too important, and that is about leadership. One of the challenges we faced, and one of the challenges that brought us stop and frisk at almost 700,000 stops, has to do with the message that leadership sends to the rank and file about what the expectations are. So, you know, what you measure and how you let people know how they can advance in an organization, if that's directly tied to quantity versus quality, then you end up with situations where you have where you end up engaging in conduct for the sake of engaging in that conduct, and enforcement activities that lead us to where we are now with more oversight. And we have, as you know, the Inspector General that was mentioned earlier. It came out of the City Council legislation, but in addition to that, we also have a federal monitor that's looking at the work that we do now going forward, specifically related to stop and frisk and what we do going forward around training in that respect. But Commissioner Bratton's approach to this in terms of looking at where we are today sees these as opportunities. These are opportunities to really redirect the culture of the department, to stress, and it takes a while, and when you're talking about 35,000 people who have been living in a particular culture that's lasted for more than a dozen years in many ways, to get them to trust that the expectations now are different, that we want you to pay attention to the quality, we want you to be reminded of the need to be respectful in every way as you do your job, and to not go to places where you don't need to go unless you have to, as it relates to the use of force and so forth. So those are the ways in which you send a message, and that message has to go not just from the top, but all the way down through all of the various command staff, and then into certainly the first line supervision, sergeants, lieutenants, and middle managers, and so forth. And when you do that, and you send that message, and you get people on board, you have a different result in terms of the way the law enforcement and the community engagement is conducted in the agency.
Next question up there.
I really
One
wanted
question here, real quickly.
Briefly, Michelle George, a member of National Action Network Detroit. My question to the panel is, I know a lot of times you were stating that you have to tell and teach your African-American son or children to how to behave with the police, but what police officers are getting away with now, and I believe they need to serve these crimes, because I'm going to participate with them to serve prison time for shooting these unarmed black men. But what about when they stop the young men or young women, they say, oh, they tried to grab my gun. That's what they're getting away with. We have to start there. Oh, they grabbed my gun. They look like they got my gun, and then they're getting away with it. That's what we're going to have to deal with, and I'm going to help deal with that and make it policy.
Okay.
Let's
get another question.
Right here, sister. You ready? All right.
This is in regard to stalking, Presidential Proclamation for National Stalking Awareness Month. I've been stalked for 9 years. Everybody in here knows me. When I
Yes.
give to Mr. Davis.
Is this a question, ma'am? Just real quickly, to a question. Just stand up. Come on. All right. Just a question real quick.
What are you doing about the stalking and harassment of me now for 9 years?
I'm sorry. We have a question for the panel. Yes, one quick question, ma'am. I got the mic.
Good afternoon. I'm Ms. Hunter from Bed-Stuy. I would like to know, when are you going to re-examine the, like you say, legal laws? Because it seems that the way they're interpreting it is negativity. And the new lawyers that are coming in, they're going to be taught that too. So please re-evaluate those laws to be looked at in a fair, positive situation. Please, because that's the route. It's going all the way up to the judge. That's why they know they can get away with it.
Okay, let's get the next one. Let's get the next question.
There is no line. I told you all when you came to the line that there was no line.
Greetings, Greetings to you, Major Franklin. I met you in Atlanta, and my name is Dr. Bertrand Marcus, and I'm the community director for Brooklyn. And I just want to ask this question to the panel. You know, we do have a constitution that is governed, that's also governed all police departments across this country. And for too long, we've been seeing the rights of the people being violated, all the way up to the judges. Is anyone addressing the issue when coming to the police, going before judges and lying on the citizens and holding them accountable, right? Because too many people are in jail and no one is doing anything about it based on the fact that the cops go up to the judges and lie. Is anyone going to take on that issue to make sure that your police officers go to the judges and tell the truth like they're supposed to do? And if they don't, are you willing to stand up and punish them for what they did?
Well, there again, you know.
Major, you want to take that?
Yeah, and I'll be very brief. This is tied to the previous question as well. One of the things that we have, and this is some homework for all of you to do when you go back to your individual states, you need to read the police officers' Bill of Rights that are in your particular state, because in many states there are certain rights, administrative rights afforded to police officers to protect them in their employment. So you need to familiarize yourself with that, and if you believe that changes should be made, then you need to advocate for that. Number two, as it relates to lying, in both police academies that I commanded, the Maryland State Police in Baltimore City, if you lied at any time, you were fired. And that's how it should be in every police department, because what you just said about the testimony, being able to rely on the testimony of a police officer in a court of law, it is absolute paramount. And if police officers realize that they can lie, either when it's writing a report or testifying in court, and get away with it and keep their jobs, we will continue to have that problem. It should be a priority for every police department. If you are caught lying in any situation, you are terminated, period.
Commissioner Tucker?
Can we
Mr.
deepen
O'Donnell,
this
one thing-
discussion and allow the community members to have a chance to talk
Yeah,
also?
Mr. O'Donnell, no disrespect, but we have to answer, we have to live in this community when this forum is over. And one of the things that we've been doing is just kind of bypassing some of the issues that were raised. And I'm glad that we have Chief Commissioner Benjamin Tucker in the room, because one of the things that we know is that the police are operating out of production goals. And most of those production goals are the accountability that officers have to bring in arrests. They're usually negative. And so one of the things we need to talk about and address, and while we have you here, is how do we create positive production goals? Those are the same things as numbers and quotas and all of that. So how do we create positive production goals so that we see a positive engagement and interaction in our community with the police? The other thing is we can't just talk about what's on paper and there's no real application in the community. You talk with the officers about what should be done, but they get in the community and they do what they want to do. We have to make sure that what is on paper is applied and carried out in the community, and then there's accountability at the end of that. If we create a positive place where their benefit is positive for being positive in our community, like stopping and talking to the young man who may be buying a Lucy cigarette, but instead he's picked up, and we're told, I pick up kids from the precinct all the time, and we're told, oh, we have to write something. You don't have to write anything. You don't have to run the kid through the system. Why not engage the community and know who the young people are in the community and have good dialogue so that it's positive? So while we have you here, I'd rather us look at how do we figure some of these things out, that you go back with some real things that you can use rather than just people hear, rhetoric. We can't do that anymore. This is the end of that. We are tired. Our children are tired. We can't sit here and let that happen. Come on.
And if I can add on to that real briefly, because Professor Kelling did make a comment that he can go into a black neighborhood like Robert Taylor Homes and ask families, black families, to name 5 things which are minor in their communities. He could guarantee that could happen. But the problem is, we got to demand better policing in our community. We don't want minor problems solved. We need major problems solved. I got 5 things right now we should demand. An end to gang warfare, an end to robberies, an end to handgun violence, an end to the crack houses, an end to the burglaries of our houses and our apartments. Those are 5 major things that the police can do right now to help solve crime in our community instead of focusing in on the minor things such as the broken windows theory.
You know what, today we've talked a lot about a lot of different things, but I do want to really bring to the forefront. I've heard generally us talk about laws, but specifically, what are the laws that are allowing these kinds of things to happen in the country? We have to get at the crux of what is really happening legislatively. We have laws in this country that are allowing these kinds of behaviors to happen, be it law enforcement, be it laymen on the street. Stand your ground laws in specific allow basically individuals, those shooters, to shoot first and ask questions later. That must be addressed. The laws give too much leeway, too much open leeway to the shooters to justifiably, in their mind, create why they're shooting in the very first place. And so until we address these kinds of laws that are allowing our people to be shot down in the street, whether it be policemen, whether it be a popcorn shooter, whether it be a man who decides that the children in the car next to him are playing music too loud, this will continue to happen. So having these kinds of discussions, we have to understand what we're dealing with. We're dealing with people's Second Amendment rights. All right, not wanting to infringe upon those rights at any point in time, but understanding there must be accountability by the law enforcement, by lay people, by people that are using these laws for their own demise to justify their own behaviors. That has not been discussed today, and until we address that, we will continue to have the same kind of problems unless we get our people to the polls to change the very laws that are creating such destruction in the country.
You know, I started out saying that people closest to the problem are closest to the solution, and then what you saw happen is that this panel ended up replicating exactly what happens in our communities. So remember this, power concedes nothing without a demand, right? The idea that we're going to have this top-down reform, that the police are going to police themselves, is just not true. It's just not going to work. It's never worked. And so while I have a ton of confidence in our president, when our Attorney General speaks up and says we have far too many people in prison for far too long for no good law enforcement reason, and then our president pardons 22 people, forgive me if I start losing my confidence in a top-down approach to reform. That's why I think it's so important for the community to have a voice in these discussions, because systems of oppression are durable and they replicate themselves. And while you're sitting there pushing for reform, you wake up the next day and you realize you have things like mass incarceration, which is a response to what? Jobless ghettos and all the things that we gained during the civil rights era. So if you think of the 4 E's, education, equality, enfranchisement, education, equality, employment, all those things have been taken away from us every time a police officer slaps a handcuff on one of our children. And so we have to be careful not to rely on the folks that are in power to concede power to change the system. It has to come in both directions, but particularly from the bottom up.
Commissioner Tucker, you want to respond to what Aisha was saying?
Yeah. So, I can't speak to the macro conversation that took place at the end, but with respect to Aisha's comments in particular, I can give you just a couple of ideas and sense of what we're doing in NYPD right now. To address just those specific issues. And she and I have had some of this conversation already. So, yeah, we will. I mean, that's the only way it works. So,
What we are not going to do is let this devolve into a point where we're not civil and we don't respect one another. So Commissioner Tucker was speaking. We're going to allow him to finish.
These young people are here to speak. Our young man here who
Commissioner Tucker, would you like to respond to this criticism of stop and frisk? And what would you say to a 15-year-old boy who has literally been stopped and frisked?
Well, I mean, I don't know the circumstances, so I'd happy to hear what he, happy to hear.
Well,
Well, you know, it would be helpful if I heard from him and not from you.
All right, so let's make this productive. Malik, let's make this productive. Let's not get lost in the emotion of this, because it's valuable. We have a 15-year-old young man who had an experience today. What would you like to say, young man? Let's hear his voice.
Give him a mic.
Nice to meet y'all. I apologize. I'm Christopher Nunez. Well, I was going on the train and I didn't have a Metro card, so my sister, she helped me get on and she swiped with me. And I was sitting there and the cop called me and I went up to him and we was talking, but the way he was sounding, like the way he told me that if I didn't have a Metro card, that I got locked up. And I told him I got locked up before for this in the 44 precinct, because that's where I live at. And I told him, and he was like, well, we're not from the 44 precinct. And he was like, he would take me in. But I was like, I'm going to see my mentor so I could come to this event. And they both didn't really care about the situation
So
when I
his
told them.
reason for stopping you was what?
Over a Metro card,
Over
over a Metro card. And he sounded like he was really serious about it. Like, the way he was talking to me made me feel, didn't make me feel good at all.
Okay, so I'm going to stop you for a second. What would you rather have experienced in that stop?
I would have rather him at least come up to me the same way. If he wanted a young person to show him respect, I would have wanted respect too. That's why I would
So
have
you
wanted.
felt like he was disrespectful?
Yeah, disrespect. I was coming
stop.
to him smart. Like, I was saying, oh, I'm sorry, sir, I apologize. I was coming to come see my mentor, so I come to the event. But the way he was making it sound like he wanted to lock me up. He wanted to take me. He wanted to take me already. But I was like, oh, you can call him and ask him. I'm going to see him right now in the morning.
I got it. Thank you. Give him some love, y'all. This is not easy for a young person to do. I want to say one thing. This is what happens with our young people. Even in their wrong, they are being criminalized to the furthest degree. And they come out, and we had a little short clip I had sent to Ebony, who helped plan this panel, of young people just like him. And all of them said, when asked, would you go to the police for help? They all said no. This is not a beat up on the police. We have to examine why our young people won't go to them. And Mr. Tucker, you have to take back to your officers, how do you bring them to you without them having the fear that something horrible is going to be the end result? We have to create better engagement. Sometimes the behavior outweighs the incident. It's too great for the incident. We are over-policing, right? So we're saying that crime is down in some cases, but there is a serious case of over-policing. We have to do something about it.
Well, we are doing something about it in a variety of ways. And so to your earlier point, let me just to give you a sense of what we're doing. And as I said before, I talked about the training. We are in the process of training all 20,000 of our police officers who are on patrol, providing them with 3 days of training, committed to changing their behavior in a variety of ways, both in terms of their tactics, and the tactics has to do with how they engage with folks, if they have to make an arrest, how they make that arrest, and how they stay safe themselves and also keep the individuals safe. But with respect to how we change, and I talked about this earlier in terms of changing the culture, one of the things we have to sort of think about is first of all, it takes time to make the change that we're trying to make. And second, let me finish.
It takes leadership.
Let him finish.
Let me finish. And so let me give you a sense of what we're doing. We're about to, in terms of the change that we're seeking, and it's directly related to some of what we talked about already, we're about to select 4 precincts. These 4 precincts, the 101, the 100 precinct in Rockaway, and the 3-3 and 3-4 precincts in Upper Manhattan, to take a look at how we free up the time of our officers to do quality policing in those neighborhoods. And so what does that mean? Part of, when we talk about community-oriented policing, and I've been a component of community-oriented policing even before it had a name, when I joined the police department at 18. And one of the reasons I joined, again, I was that young man. I remind you, 46 years ago, 47 years ago. And so it's not that I don't get it. I do get it. And so what we're trying to do is, in these precincts, is provide these officers, free up their time. Right now, they go from one radio run job to the next based on the 911 calls that come in. They don't have the time to engage in what we would consider to be quality policing. And so where we're headed with this pilot is to test this thesis that if we give them free up 30% of their time so that they can get out of those radio cars, that they can take the time to engage with community in positive ways. You may not know this, but the officers that graduate from the academy now versus what used to happen in the prior administration, when they graduate, they get out in the field, they go out with field training officers. Those field training officers are senior officers who provide these officers, the new probationary officers, with support so that they can get their sea legs as they try to learn how to do the job and do it properly. And that is as it relates to how they engage with the community. The second thing that we've done that I thought was important was in terms of how we close the gap, this communication gap that exists between police and community, was to actually invite citizens from the respective communities where our officers are now being assigned. And now they, instead of going to these so-called impact zones as they were previously, they all now go to every single one of our precincts, our 77 precincts, our transit districts, and our PSAs. And they go there with not only the field training support, these mentors, these senior officers to help them get it right, but they also go with the being hosted by citizens who live in those communities. Because we thought that it might be helpful. We asked for volunteers. We have more than 600, 700 people who have volunteered, citizens like yourselves who live in these communities, who now host these officers. They walk their posts with them. They introduce them to other members of the community. They tell them about community events. In essence, they give them a sense of what the neighborhood culture is and what the expectations are. That's a huge step.
But that can't be one-sided, because some of those folks that do that are like the cheerleaders for the police. That
Listen,
has to not
it's not one-sided.
Someone has a voice that they are not part of that process.
Aisha, it's not one-sided. And so let me finish. And so, listen, these folks who have volunteered, the folks who have volunteered are not restricted to the folks you described.
Right, okay.
Anyone can be a volunteer, a community partner, and host the police officers. So each one of you sitting here has the opportunity to engage in that activity. Okay, so it's not exclusive. And the whole purpose of that is, and the reason it shouldn't be exclusive is because of there needs to be this engagement,
Absolutely.
this dialogue that is constructive.
So maybe we'll get some of our young people to be able
That's
to
exactly
go around
right.
with these officers
Yeah.
and do the same thing.
Exactly.
Okay. I'm going to hold you to it.
We, for the last several minutes, I have been getting the signal that we're out of time. I haven't been ignoring that signal because I know that signal comes from Reverend Al, and he needs to keep these programs moving. But I do have the most difficult job on this panel today, which is to bring it to an end. And I just want to, we're 15 minutes over. We're going to ruin the rest of the schedule here at the meetings if we don't wrap this up now. And so I wish we got to your questions sooner. I'm sorry we didn't, but we are really out of time. I hope some of the panelists can stay around and take some of your questions personally. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Can we have the panel exit to the right? Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, can we allow the panelists to exit the stage, and then you can get their numbers, their cards? Can we please allow the panelists to exit the stage, and you can ask them the questions on the side? Thank you. Let us please allow the panelists to exit the stage.
I wish we had more time. How you doing? All right. Good to meet you.
Ladies and gentlemen, can we please allow the panelists to exit the stage, and then you can ask them the questions.
On and on, but to honor her parents, Ms. Abernathy authored the historic book, Partners to History, Martin Luther King, Ralph David Abernathy, and the Civil Rights Movement. And we will hear so much more about these fabulous people, but please give it up for Donzale Abernathy. And last, but certainly not least, is my baby sister, the youngest daughter of two, to Reverend Al and Kathy Jordan Sharpton, Ashley Sharpton, an aspiring media proprietor and community organizer. In 2009, Ashley founded Sharpton Entertainment, an entertainment company specializing in showcase production, scouting, branding, and promotions. In 2013, Ashley delved into the worlds of social media and activism. In addition to running her own entertainment company, she became director of social media communications at Massenburg Media. Shortly after, Reverend Sharpton himself brought Ashley in to expand his personal and radio show social network presence. She was also instrumental in enhancing National Action Network's Youth Move and Youth Huddle's social media presence, in which she founded an initiative and associated with the National Action Network called The Huddle in December 2013. The Huddle is a meeting place for youth and young adults to act on their dreams, develop, lead, and empower. The Huddle is free to attend, includes dinner, and seeks to assist with the social, intellectual, academic, physical, and cultural development of youth who aspire to be their best selves. Please welcome Ms. Ashley Sharpton. So I share this view with my fellow children of the movement, but we all have a personal view on the most historic civil rights figures in history. We have really a remarkable seat at the table, and it's really our duty as the children of the movement to be that bridge from those real-life people to the foot soldiers who will keep and have continued and carried out these legacies of our parents, but also these activists we refer to as the icons of the civil rights movement. So I'm going to begin the discussion. It's always important, as we've heard, I'm sure our parents say a lot of times, it's important to be defined, but it's also more important to define ourselves. So, how do you define yourself? Donzale?
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here with you today. How I define myself, first and foremost, is as an artist. I'm an actress, and I enjoy making a living as an actress. However, by the circumstances of my birth I'm a child of the civil rights movement. To whom much is given, much is expected. Therefore, I don't have the luxury to be no one and to go mindlessly through life. I have a moral and a social obligation to be a part of the community, to try and create solutions in the community, to come downstairs from upstairs and listen to what was said in the previous panel, to be a voice, and to go into the community and help. And so that's exactly what I do. And one of the things I do want to say is that I'm dealing with the probation system in Los Angeles, California. And one of the solutions we've found has been truancy. And young people and older people, I want you all to understand the police do not have the right to treat us any kind of way that they treat us. And you all were right to speak up a few moments ago in this room and to express your opinions to the police commissioners. They need to know that this country does not need to be a police state and that they don't treat white children the same way they treat black children.
Ashley, you, it said in your bio that you formed the Huddle, a place for young people to come and really delve into exploring who they are. How did that idea, I guess, come about? Was it something that you personally felt driven to do, or was it something you felt obligated to do in order to actually have a place in the movement?
I guess both. First, we've always been a part of NAME, Dominique and I, and a group of young people. Mary Pat Hector, a National Youth Director, is here. But in New York City, there was always a lack of youth, I felt. And I felt like it was our duty to be responsible for that. At first, I used to run away from that, and it goes to answer the first question as defining yourself. I used to run away from Sharpton and Al Sharpton's daughter because I looked, everyone my whole life was like, oh, you look just like your father, you act just like your father. So it was a nuisance at first. I didn't like it. I used to run away from it. And I used to be like, oh my God, my name is Ashley, please. But I had to learn to embrace it because that's a part of me. Ignoring that is ignoring a part of myself. So I was disservicing myself by neglecting that part of myself. And Huddle actually has helped me more than I feel I've helped the youth. They've helped me to become myself and to find my purpose and to find my mission in life. And I feel like it is my duty to be responsible for that aspect in Action Network as a young person and a young adult. So yes, I feel like it's both.
Ms. Bernice King, a lot of the times, and you can talk a lot about this, we're constantly known as the daughter of, the son of, and you have definitely been one who has broken that situation. Can you speak to what is our duty as children of the movement? Do we have a place to lead the movement? Should we find our place? Like what exactly, how can you speak to your place and how you've been able to evolve and be your own individual self and do great things and accomplish great things outside of being just the daughter of or the son of? Can you speak to those experiences in your journey?
Yes. First and foremost, I define myself as a citizen of the kingdom of God. And secondly, as the daughter of an incredible legacy that I inherited from both my parents, not just my father. I always tell people that the Martin Luther King Jr. that we revere today, that we know today, would not have been at the iconic level that he is had it not been for Coretta Scott King.
That's right.
And so I define her as the architect of the King legacy.
That's right.
But with that said, I praise God for the mother that I had. She was an incredible example of unconditional love and forgiveness and service to humanity. And one of the things she ensured as we were growing up is that we understood that you don't have to be your daddy and you don't have to be me. My only requirement is that you be your best self. Now, that did not automatically translate immediately into us or me specifically feeling, not feeling the pressure of being their children. But it gave me a guide and it gave me a sense of comfort because at the end of the day, I knew that my mother's expectation is that I be my best Bernice. And so I went through stages and phases of really trying to run away from the identity. In fact, one of the reasons that I went to law school is to ensure that I had my own sense of identity when I was called to the ministry at 17. And so once I completed law school, that's like, okay, this is my thing, even though I've never practiced law. But I could if I want to. I just want to set the record straight. I am barred and an active member of the State Bar of Georgia. But with that said, you know, after running for so long and reconciling my calling as I have matured, I've come to a place to recognize the incredible responsibility that I have to advance my parents' legacy. At one stage running from it, but now surrendering to it gladly, because I understand that I sit between two generations, and I have to serve as a bridge in hearing and trying to connect those generations so that the sacrifices that my parents and Donzale's parents and everybody on this panel's parents made to ensure that we continue the spirit of that struggle, because that movement, whether we agree with it or not, was successful at the end of the day. In its time, it was successful. They were not called to cure all of the social ills that we are faced with, but we spent too much time not ensuring that the next generation understood those sacrifices. And so now I find myself situated in a place of trying to make sure that we make those connections, because I think if we're going to continue what has started, then we must make the connection. I'm going to close with this because I share everywhere I go. My mother said something, and I want you to wrestle with this. Some people disagree with me, and that's fine. I'm used to disagreement. But she said, struggle is a never-ending process. Freedom is never really won. You earn it and you win it in every generation. And so that has comforted me when I've seen things that have happened recently with police brutality, with the Voting Rights Act basically being gutted, with fair housing now being threatened, to understand that we are being called in this generation to make a contribution to the freedom struggle. And no matter who you are, we're all born into it. No one is exempt. You may personally opt out, but generationally, we all have a call to make a contribution to this freedom struggle.
I do want to introduce, we have Kwame Abernathy, who has joined our panel as well. So Kwame, welcome, and thanks for joining us. Donzale's brother. So thanks for joining us. Malak Shabazz. Malak is one of the twins who was in Dr. Betty's stomach when your father, Malcolm X, was assassinated. And so you actually never met your father personally, right? But you've always had to be, I guess, recognized as the daughter of Malcolm X. Can you speak to that? I know that we've had a lot of discussions about this, throughout our lives. Malak is like a big sister to me and one of my mentors as well. Can you speak to how it was defining yourself, being the daughter of Malcolm X and Dr. Betty, and how, a little bit about your journey, how you have evolved to this amazing humanitarian and activist today?
Well, first of all, you're a goddaughter of my mother. Secondly, anybody who thinks that I did not know my father, they disrespect my mother, thinking that she didn't teach me. Because anybody who was a student at Medgar Evers College knows that she said, "Am I clear?" Anybody know about Medgar Evers? Thank you. The only historical black college in the state of New York. Dr. Betty. And you, too. Her blessings. You are the other extra two. Crumb snatchers. Loved you tremendously. My mother raised 6 girls in the climate of hate. And let's all get real on that in 1965 if you understand the history. If you understand the time, these people who were being miseducated by Puffy and Jay-Z and whatever Look, it's all good. They're minstrels and entertainment, but right now we need education. And we need understanding about what the history and the shoulders that they're standing on. Okay, a lot of them don't know that. They just don't get it. We are children of people who made sure we were educated. They weren't having it. I couldn't come home with less than a B+, Lord Jesus. And I'm a Muslim and I'm singing whatever. I'm just saying it's all about interfaith. It's about interfaith because you know what? Racism and terrorism does not have a religion. So we need to get over that stuff. We really do. It's Christianity, it's Islam, it's Judaism, whatever. We need to understand. My father put his faith in his back pocket. The lyncher wasn't thinking about if you were a Christian or a Muslim. He saw a black man and was going to lynch you anyway. So let's get real on that. So we need to really understand where black people are going, where people of color are going, and how we can understand each other for religious intolerance, basically. But when Dominique called me, I was on my eldest sister, Atala Shabazz. She's an ambassador. She said, we have to give back to human global service because this is what Mommy and Daddy did. She called me, I was in Glasgow, Scotland. They thought Malcolm X was Scottish. Remember Dominique?
Yes.
I was in Liverpool. There's only 3 documents, exhibits in Liverpool. It's Malcolm X, the North Atlantic slave trade, and John Lennon. They think Malcolm X is from Liverpool. But the thing was, their focus is on consciousness and the North Atlantic slave trade. What are we doing to focus on the North Atlantic slave trade? This year is the International Decade of People of African Descent. How many people know that? Are there hands up? Thank you. I don't see a lot. But we need to know that. Black people in this country need to know of the African diaspora, what is going on. And this conference is showing the African diaspora. And these daughters are putting forth the new generation so they understand what is going on for people of African descent. We need to understand that. Excuse me? Okay. I'm just saying, why isn't this taught in our schools? Al Sharpton's daughters are bringing this to the forefront, and they're younger than me, and I'm 50. This is 5090, the 50th anniversary of Malcolm X's assassination, 90th of his birthday. A lot of people don't know that either, but that's okay. But I'm glad that my sisters here at least allowed me to come here to express myself with the Abernathys, with Dr. King's daughter, which I know her very well, Auntie Coretta, God bless her soul. God bless her soul, please.
Thank you, Malak. Jemida, you've been very vocal in the organization, the organizational aspect of really carrying on this torch and continuing this legacy, of course, that your notable parents were pioneers of. Can you speak a little bit to your experience? What drove you to really want to be involved? We don't hear a lot, from the children of these notable icons. Speak a little bit to your journey and what helped you define yourself, and what paved your way to becoming who you are today and where you're heading.
I think the difference between me and the other siblings on the panel is that my father was behind the scenes. And a lot of people, unless you knew what they call him leader, you didn't know him. My dad was one of the first field staffers hired by Dr. King, and he was a part of the advance team to go out into a city before Dr. King came into the city.